This is Ministry with Us, and today's episode is Ministry with the Incarcerated, hosted by Charlie Collins, Taylor Collins, and Vivienne Hernandez. We're joined by Kenneth Hunter and Lauren Ramsor. Can you both give us a quick definition of what prison ministry means to you?
Sure. I think prison ministry for me looks like accompaniment and really honoring the personhood and the whole dignity of people who are incarcerated. I think it also means understanding incarceration as mass incarceration and as the ongoing legacy of slavery. So for me, it's really important in thinking about ministry, what perspective you're coming from. And it really is about being part of this long history of abolishing slavery that leads on to abolishing the prison industrial complex. And so really it's thinking about how can we walk alongside people who have been who are suffering under this oppression and honor their human dignity with every step. So accompaniment has been a big word for me in prison ministry and thinking about my role as a pastor and also the role of all of our volunteer communities that we accompany and seek to build up and remind folks of their dignity and work for liberation all the ways we can.
And, ditto to all of that. When I think of ministering, I think of help, healing, and serving. So, and then when I think of ministering to the incarcerated, I think of like being mindful and informed about their needs. And what does it mean to help those incarcerated? And what does it mean to heal those incarcerated? And how can we be of service to those incarcerated? And I think if we adjust our mindset to treat those incarcerated that way, then we will be better as a country, and we will certainly be better as a community. So there are a lot of issues. There's a myriad of issues that individuals incarcerated and deal with. And there are so many ways that we can help if we choose to approach it that way.
So what are your personal reasons for being involved in prison ministry and advocacy for those who are incarcerated?
My personal reasons, briefly, I spent 22 years in the Virginia Department of Corrections for a nonviolent drug offense. I was 21 years old. I came home when I was 43. I had never been incarcerated. I had been in some basic trouble as a juvenile, but I got in trouble at a time when it was tough on crime, and we as a country had decided that we could throw away a whole demographic of people. And that was really a tough time in our history. And, America has a lot of tough times in its history. I would like to believe that we have moved on from that, at least in that philosophy. But my experience will not allow me to turn a blind eye. I live with this every day. I think of it every day. I have friends, brothers, sisters who are still incarcerated, and I am in touch with them, and they are never far from my heart. And so I'm hugely motivated to serve those incarcerated. I want to see them free, but I also know that there are some who need more healing, and I think that it's important that I be a voice for those people. So that's my personal connection.
My personal connection came when I showed up in seminary for the first month of classes, and we were assigned a practicum for ministry, and I was assigned to the Georgia Justice Project, which is a nonprofit in Atlanta that provides legal defense for folks who are accused of committing a crime, and then wraparound services and support in all areas of their life as they represent them through the course and also advocate for them as people. And I was assigned to go to take intakes in the jail. And that was a whole new world for me. Had never experienced anything like that, but started mentoring a young woman who had been accused of killing her child, and she was innocent, and just fell in love with her, just knowing what a beautiful person she was and seeing this awful predicament she was in and dealing with her own grief and losing her child. And and then seeing all of the injustice that was happening in the justice system that my eyes were becoming open to, that's how I began to be really passionate about the work. And then it just keeps calling me. I've been involved with working with people who are incarcerated for over 20 years, and everywhere I've moved, it's something I seek out. And this current work I'm doing is I got a call to work in a local congregation that was located 1 mile from the Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Center. And so, of course, my question was, how do we get involved? Mm-hmm. And so I started visiting there, and they asked if we could start a gospel choir. So I reached out to a friend and found a gospel choir director who wanted to come, and we started a gospel choir with about 24 children who are incarcerated just 1 mile from my congregation. And so that getting to know those kids and loving them and longing for their freedom has launched me into the current work that I'm doing now.
So we did some digging, and we found out that the Bible mentions the word prisoner or prison 129 times. And we're just curious, how often do you think that the congregations in the United States mention prison or prisoners? And how do you think they go about making that a conversation within churches?
Yeah.
And that's a really good question and good digging. I do think it depends on the congregation. And I'm always about self-empowerment. I believe that the more you know, the better you can do. And so in my daily life, I always try to make people aware and educate people. I think one of the mistakes I made early on getting into advocacy and activism was assuming that everyone was turning a blind eye. And that's not true. People don't know. I've met so many good people who are hearing from me for the first time some of the history that we have with incarceration in this country. And so to bring that back to what you asked, I think that the more opportunities we get to tell people, then the more opportunities they will have to share with their congregations, and the more often you will hear prisoners mentioned in prayers. We have a duty, right? We have a duty as people of faith. I work for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, and we believe that all faiths believe in justice. And so if we have that duty as people of faith, then we'll be more inclined to speak on these kind of issues and not be silent about it. And so, I think it's up to folks like us to spread awareness, to be as vocal as we possibly can be, to speak truth to power at times when it's not even popular. This isn't always a popular subject depending on who's in office. But we know that it needs to be talked about, not just sometime, but all the time. And so I don't know exactly how many congregations are mentioning them in prayers right now, but I do know that I'll be working to make sure that more mention them every time they pray.
Yeah. The really powerful thing is that for the Christian church, if you know the story of Jesus, then you know that the high point of our story about Jesus is that Jesus was arrested.
Yes.
He was tortured.
Yes.
And then he was executed by the state.
Yes.
And so that is the primal central narrative of the Christian church. And then God redeemed that story of violence with the resurrection and said, violence is not going to have the last word in my story. And so the central message of the Christian narrative is one of capital punishment, incarceration, and torture within the prison system. So that's central to our story. And if we're not talking about it, we are missing the whole context of the central message of the Bible. Also, and then we also then have like Paul, who was always being arrested and writing so many of the letters that we read in the New Testament from a place of incarceration, right? From a prison cell. And I would agree that like it depends on the church, right? It's different churches are engaging it in so many different ways. What I have found is that everywhere I go, when I talk about prison, my work in prison ministry, there is somebody in the congregation, and I'm talking from small rural congregations to like big wealthy congregations. there's somebody in every congregation I visited that has been impacted by incarceration. They have a family member that's incarceration that's incarcerated. They have a child in their community that's been arrested recently. They have a loved one, a brother, a sister. Everybody. I have not gone to a single congregation without a connection, and have been surprised in some places. Some communities, like wealthy white congregations that are very protected from the structures of mass incarceration. And even there's always been somebody who's come out and said, my brother is in prison. And so that's been a surprise for me on the journey. Yeah. But it's central to our story, so we need to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just thank you for that. I mean, honestly, like, every time I hear folks talk about their experience with meeting new people or discussing this with new people and getting this kind of interest, it's inspiring to me. It's more inspiring to keep talking about it, to keep spreading this particular message. This is a common statistic, but I always share it that America makes up 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. And so when you talk about everywhere you go, someone has a brother or sister, well, we see why. Because there's such a large percentage of the American population adversely affected by the justice system. So it's a wide reaching dynamic. And so there are a lot of people who are touched by it. And so that gives us an opportunity to spread that kind of awareness.
All right, so our next question is, what are the greatest challenges for those who feel called to prison ministry today, or what are the biggest challenges for a successful ministry in prisons today?
Oh yeah, man. Listen. So I'm gonna take on the second part of that question. The biggest challenges for successful ministries in prisons today. I'm really big into folks understanding the infrastructure of prison. I've met a lot of advocates and folks who fight for the incarcerated, but they don't have the experience that I had with prison, and so I understand how prisons operate on a different level, right? So, even as we are trying to help folks, and then a lot of times free folks from prison, you don't hear much about, especially from our side, about the real issues that prisons have. And prisons have security issues. This is a real thing. It cannot be denied. Is that excuse used a little bit too broadly to enforce things? Yes, absolutely. But it does not take away from the real security issues that some of these policies have been put in place to protect. And so what I've heard from a lot of volunteers is, the things they have to go through to get into prisons, the lockdowns, where you're not able to keep a steady flow of information or contact. I've heard of this a lot as challenges. And but I think the best way to deal with those challenges is for folks who are going to be visiting prisons or dealing with prisons in any capacity, is to be as educated as you can about what those challenges are, be proactive about it. For example, I put this proposal in. I carved out a piece in the proposal that put our own restrictions on how we would bring information into the facility, right? I wanted them to know that we are aware of the challenges that you have. And so this is what we'll do to basically meet you there before you even bring it up here. This is what we'll have all this stuff ready for you weeks prior to us coming for this particular program. And that's not always possible depending on what program you're doing. But it is very good to make yourself aware of what that prison is facing. There are different security levels, low to maximum, to medium, to super maximum. That is a real challenge, understanding the prison system on an infrastructural level. And then using that information to make sure that you try to create things that can exist within the confines of those rules or policies. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight to change them at times, but we also need to make sure we're aware of why those things are in place, because there are some troubled folks in prison. And so, and it takes a different degree of, it's kind of fragile. You have to be really careful with how you handle it. So that's what came to mind on that second question.
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is just getting in and having regular access. And so, like, in doing prison ministry, you have to be resilient. You have to be persistent. And you have to be resilient and persistent. Because, I mean, the truth is that it is not in the prison system's interest to have volunteers in there. It makes life more complicated for them. They have to have more staff. It creates a vulnerable group of people who aren't trained as their officers are trained to handle if a conflict arises. So you have a group of people now who have to be additionally looked after. And so it's really bothersome to them. I think, they say, yes, we want this. This is good for the, community, but that's not really their interest. So you have to know that the prison system wants to shut down visitation all the time. So you see that more prisons are being built, and they're built without access for even families to visit. They're trying to move prisons to only virtual visitation. And we think, oh, that's great. People from far away can do the virtual, but what that does, the growth of the virtual means they have fewer opportunities to see their families live, and connection with family when somebody is incarcerated is the number one predictor of not going back to prison. Like, if you have a strong connection to your family and loved ones, it is the strongest predictor that you will be able to be healthy and supported when you're back in community and be successful and not come back to prison. And so it's really important to have those person to person. I mean, for so many reasons. But getting in, they're constantly, because of lockdowns, anytime anything happens on the inside the prison, they can just change your visitation. You have very little control over who you get to see, and like, things change. So you just have to be persistent. You have to be flexible. You just have to keep trying, and you have to be willing to push back. You have to be brave and be willing to challenge the system and just keep not letting them shut you out.
Love that last part. Love it. Yeah. I mean, when they have a right to practice their religion, and so there's an interest in, public safety, but there's also an interest in protecting the rights of those incarcerated. And so knowing when to push back, but being ready to push back when you're being pushed around. Because sometimes the wrong folks are in power and they will try to dismiss you. But if you know you're supposed to be there, then you may have a different response. Yeah. But,
like you said, I think it's like a bit of a dance. Like, you got to meet them halfway and like maintain a positive and healthy relationship with the staff that you're working with. And because like most the folks who are the volunteer coordinator, there's wonderful people who are really trying to do good, but the structures, work against them sometimes. So sometimes even the staff are like, their hands are tied. It's just it's tough. So it's about, you have to have good positive relationships, but you got to know when to stand up and push back and call in for help. And
definitely
that's the biggest thing. Is that you have very little control over kind of who you get to see and how normally when you're structuring a program and you're inviting people to come, like, you get to decide when it happens, where it happens, how many people can come, whether you're going to serve food or not. You get to make those choices with your program. But like, when you're doing a program in the prison system, you cannot, you have to go by somebody else's rules, and there's just so many limitations. So, but you just do it. And so you can get in there, because what's most important is to get in the door and make those visits.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot to navigate.
Yes. Can you tell us about one of the toughest personal challenges you faced, whether it's on a day-to-day basis or a specific incident, and how you kind of keep your faith through the challenges?
I think one of the most personal, toughest challenges that I face is the way that this country marginalizes people with a past like mine. No matter what I'm doing, some people embrace me Like, and that's where I draw my strength from. But a lot of those folks embrace me, and they say, hey, they may not even immediately think that I've been incarcerated. But for those that do know and have adverse reactions to it, it's always a tough thing. It's always a tough thing to see a door shut in your face, or an opportunity, or being passed over for a good opportunity. And I think what I know that every time that happens to me, as disappointing as it may be in the moment, it is also the fire that kind of drives me to fight more. And I know that I'm more than my worst moment, right? I also know that there will be a lot more people in prison if they have been caught at their worst moment, right? So I don't allow that to, determine my self-image. I know what I see when I look in the mirror, and I know what I feel when I pray at night. And so that is definitely my toughest challenge, is overcoming this label or stigma that rests with people being formerly incarcerated or formerly convicted of a felony. And so, but it's fuel. It's fuel for the fire. It's the reason we're fighting in the first place. If we didn't have this problem, then I wouldn't be doing the work I do. So that's the challenge, and that's where I draw my strength from.
I think one of my big challenges is seeing children tried as adults. So, and being in courtrooms where children at 14 and 15 a judge can just say, there are a few criteria they have to meet, but the judge has all this power to say, because you committed a violent crime, or you are accused of committing this crime. This is before they've been found guilty. That you're not a child anymore. And so all of the protections that our country has fought for and the Supreme Court has declared are guaranteed for children, because they don't have the brain development that adults do. Children's brains don't understand consequences really until you're about 24. Our brains just don't have that full connection between actions and consequences until we're 24. So in many other countries in the world, you cannot be charged as an adult till you're 24. In our country, it's 14, or in Virginia, it's 14. And then there's some criteria around like what charges you have, what charges you're facing. But seeing that children charged as adults and knowing that they lose all of those protections, and seeing children then go through trial in an adult court where they're not treated as children anymore, even though they're 14 and 15, and are treated as though they were making adult decisions and capable of making adult decisions, which they weren't, and then given sentences of 25, 45,
Or longer.
75 years. It is devastating. It's devastating. And in these places, harm has happened, but you see everybody loses. Instead, often, like in a case, there was a murder, and so there was a teenager who'd been killed by gun violence. And so that family was deeply grieving their loss. And then the other family, their child was now going to prison for the next 45 years. And so they've lost their child too. And that's what really is so difficult for me, is to see the brokenness of our legal system, and to watch and to see judges make those kinds of decisions so easily. But what gives me hope is the kids. They are resilient, and we just keep fighting, and the families are resilient, and there's such a huge community of folks that are working to change laws so that there are second chance opportunities. Yes. And just knowing that things can change, that what happened today in the courtroom is, in 10 years may look very different. And just knowing that there's lots of good people working for good gets me back in there with hope.
My hope is in you all. I mean that. I really hope this younger generation who has this interest and energy will grab the reins, and because we need creativity, I'm working on a series called Justice Reimagined, and the whole concept is kind of like geared at reframing how we see justice, which is what I was thinking about as far as spoke. It's like right now we have crime on TV, visceral reaction, and we scream for what we call justice. And all we mean is punish, right? Because we equate that as justice. You make a mistake, there's punishment. And justice should be more in tune with accountability, and accountability should be more holistic, which would be community accountability. Because a lot of people who are involved with the criminal justice system, unfortunately, are suffering from ordeals that we created as communities, right? That we've, situations that we've created, abject poverty that has been created by our country in certain instances. And so I would like to see a time when we figure out not how to punish, but how do we make things right for both sides?
Yeah.
This family lost a child or lost a loved one. Punishing this person will not bring back that loved one. But what can we do to serve that family? And what can this person do to serve that family?
That's right.
That's right. And that's just very general on the surface. Mm-hmm. But I can't wait to see young minds approach this with creativity and different ways for us to deal with something that isn't working. It's not working, right? We're not reducing the prison population by making communities better yet, right? So we need a new approach to it. So, my hope, of course, in God, but it is in this young generation of folks that have this passion to do some of the things you all are doing.
So then for those listening or watching this podcast, can you suggest some ways that they can get more involved in supporting those who are incarcerated?
Shameless plug. So as I stated, I'm with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. I'm an organizer for an initiative called the Virginia Consensus for Higher Education in Prison. We are working to expand access to college programs for folks incarcerated. In 2023, they restored Pell funding eligibility for folks incarcerated. So we got thousands of people here in Virginia who have the funding available to go to college, but we don't have the college programs in place. And so we were able to successfully at least get a bill to the governor's desk, as we're waiting for him to sign it, with bipartisan support, House Bill 2158, that kind of laid out a pathway to us expanding access to college programs. And we're looking, one of our sectors is the educational sector. And that consists of instructors, college faculty, but also students, right? To sign up to be a part of the consensus. And that can be as simple as, being willing to spread awareness, being willing to participate in workshops, in some cases even corresponding with those incarcerated to encourage them along their journey of education. But to get involved, you need look no further than your keyboard, right? You Google what's going on here in Virginia, and you'll see those kind of organizations. I'm also the president of the Virginia Justice Alliance, and we're always looking for volunteers and interns to work with us as well. So, what you find out what your passion is, because this is a multi-layered onion. It's not just this one thing. There are so many things that go into this criminal justice reform in general. And you find out what matters to you, and you find a way to get involved. There's no shortage of work. I promise you that there's always a place where your expertise can be used. And so in the interim, though, knowledge is power. So educate yourself about this stuff. The things you guys said to me today is encouraging to know that you all knew that. That you knew that, to relate that to me, and tell that to everybody so that everybody knows. And continue to read and continue to add on to your reservoir, so you'll be fully equipped to defend or offend in cases, to make sure that we get to where we're trying to go, which is to make sure that the world is aware of our efforts to try to do better by those incarcerated. But yeah, we're waiting on you. Anytime you want something to do, we got something for you. So reach out to us, www.vchep.org. You're welcome to do that. And as well as the Virginia Justice Alliance.org. So if you're ever interested, I'd be happy to aid and assist or point you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, likewise, shameless plug. My organization is called Voices of Jubilee, and we accompany children, youth, and young adults who are incarcerated in the greater Richmond area. And then as if they have been given adult time, as long as wherever they go, we stick with them. So we always welcome folks to join our community and to work to address all of the issues that are facing young people who are dealing with detention and incarceration here in Virginia. So it's voicesofjubilee.org. Yeah, that's you can find us. But I think for students especially, that one of the interesting touch points is the school to prison pipeline. And that's a place where you can look at your, go back and talk to your home community and find out about what that looks like in your home community. What is the rate of how many in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions are happening, and look at some of those pipelines, because that's, thinking about like police officers, resource officers in the schools, metal detectors, all these things are part of like the setting up this structure where we are funneling certain children directly into the prison system. So going back and like looking at what's happening in your high school, where you went to high school, looking at your home community, and then connecting with, there's a huge movement to end the school to prison pipeline. And I think that's a real place where young people can really engage, because you've just recently come from, if you're at college now, that you've recently come from high school, you might have siblings that are still, in high school. And that can be a real place of connection for you to get personally involved. And there's some great organizations working to end that pipeline and build restorative communities inside the school system. So instead of having when there's violence that breaks out, when there's a fight that breaks out in school, instead of sending those kids home and expelling them from the school or kicking them out of the education system or even suspending them for some time, there's restorative practices where the community talks about the harm that happened, and just exactly what you're saying about how can we restore this community? How can we all participate in healing what was broken and build a community together? And no one has to be removed from that. And everyone gets stronger by learning how to build their conflict resolution skills. And nobody needs to be kicked out of school. School is a safe place, is the place where vulnerable kids belong and find support and safety when sometimes their communities aren't safe for them. And so to kick a vulnerable child out is the worst decision. So I just think that's a great entry place for young people, is to get involved in that particular avenue.
I think that was all of our questions.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us on Ministry with Us and for educating people in the prison ministry.